when you entered the Naval Academy, did you intend to go into the nuclear program? Was that a goal of yours?
Yeah, it was somewhat atypically. I think a lot of people who go into the academy aren't necessarily sure what they want to do. But my dad served on submarines in the old diesel boats back in the day, and I'd heard stories, and what I knew about the nuke community was it's pretty elite, pretty challenging, and looked like kind of something very interesting to do. I will say I joined it more to drive the submarines than I did to be the nuke, right? But as you know, you don't get to be an officer on a sub without being the nuke. I found the nuke stuff more interesting than maybe I originally thought it would be when I set out to do it. Yep.
So you used two words there I'm interested in following up on. You heard that the nuke program, or you knew that the nuke program was elite and challenging.
Mhm.
Elite, how so?
That they don't let anybody do it. That you have to have a certain amount of intelligence and drive and motivation, and you have to be able to demonstrate ability to think on your feet. I knew that I would go through an interview, with the head of the Navy nuclear program, and that those are not pushover interviews, and that I'd be joining an elite crowd of people, both officer and enlisted, who serve as nukes.
Yeah. And then use the word challenging.
Yeah.
And of course, your perspective is that of an officer, but
Mhm.
as you're working with the enlisteds, I'm gathering that or I gather that you would sort of pick up what would be challenging for them as
Yeah.
well, and
Yeah.
challenging in a negative and positive sense. When you think about
Right.
your own experience as a nuke officer, and maybe thinking, officers and then enlisted, what were
Yeah.
some of the positive and maybe more difficult challenges that nukes faced?
Right. Well, let me start with there's military service, there's deployed military service. There are very challenging deployments that the other branches do. But in general, deploying in the Navy is pretty tough, just from a personal, emotional, you're away from family, extended periods, you're, often facing risks and stuff like that. Within the Navy, there's sea duty, and then there's submarine sea duty. Submariners, okay, fine, the food's a little bit better. But I would say that the quality of the environment, it presents its challenges. The nature of operating a nuclear vessel at sea is definitely more challenging, I would say, than a conventional ship. And specifically being one of the nukes, speaking specifically the enlisted, who has to day in and day out maintain, operate, and deal with whatever comes on that very complicated set of equipment and machinery is nothing short of a massive challenge. And from an officer standpoint, being the person who's ultimately accountable and has to make some tough decisions every once in a while. Yeah, I just think it compounds. I forget the skipper's name, but there's a former sub skipper out there somewhere who's got a YouTube video, where he's talking about he's answering the question is submarine duty challenging, and he kind of goes on and, well, you put 4,500 pound air and x thousand pound hydraulic oil and a nuclear reactor and all these things, and he lists all the hazards. You stick it in a steel tube, none of which of that equipment reacts very well to seawater, and then you sink the thing intentionally in seawater. Yes, it's challenging and dangerous. So
Yeah, I can imagine that. So, as you've said, folks who are in the nuclear program, it's understood that that they're highly intelligent. Um, and so that's one of the traits, that we
mhm.
see in these folks. Thinking specifically about submarine service,
Yeah.
just in your experience, as you look back on those sailors you worked with who
Yeah.
succeeded in that specific environment, what kinds of additional traits that they have? Because
Yeah.
you could be super smart, but just not function very well in the submarine, I'm sure.
Sure.
But what are the traits of those who not only could do the job, but could do it well in that
Yeah.
environment?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to have the raw academic horsepower, but once you, I mean, that's kind of the thing that gets you in the door, gets you into the nuclear training program, and gets you through it. I would say actually life at sea and thriving in that environment is much more than that. It's, um, I guess, the ability to think very quickly on your feet, to problem solve in a fairly unique way where you're data driven, but you don't let lack of data hold you back. So you have to be able to be fluid. You want to be structured. You want to make the right decisions based on the information that you have and the facts that you have. But to the extent you're missing facts and information, you need to be able to quickly fill that in. Accountability, responsibility, they're those are traits that every good nuke has, that they understand the difference between the two. They can work fluidly between the two and um, live up to that. I think quick learning, the ability to learn just about anything. I mean, my personal 30-second elevator speech is I'm a political scientist who turned into a nuclear engineer who figured out how to drive submarines, who somehow became a finance guy. And all I say is, submarine duty and being a nuke is just one area where I've demonstrated that, yeah, I can come in and learn just about anything. So I often face the question as a CFO when I'm going into a new type of company, a new industry. Well, you don't have background in this industry. How do we know that you're going to be successful? I said, well, let me tell you. And so far, I've transitioned into multiple industries. I became a nuke and all that stuff. So I think
Sure.
those are the key traits. Resilience maybe is another one I'd call out. Not every day is a great day, and sometimes you face weeks on end. I mean, I remember deployed on Parchi, we had times when, yeah, I don't know, the still was down. It wasn't a good time to be one of the mechanics on board. When I was electrical officer, we had some very difficult electrical system failures and repairs that we needed to do under duress on short notice. Things like running out of a certain type of motor brushes and having to just figure it out because we can't let the mission fail. Times when I was ship's drill coordinator and led the drill team, trying to prepare for whether it was our operational or our reactor safeguard exams and stuff like that. I mean, those were some very difficult days where you had to be able to compartmentalize, work the problems, deal with the rest later and prioritize and things like that. So those are all traits that
Sure.
nukes are pretty sure to have, especially the successful ones.
Yeah, and it sounds like a lot of this is going to be rooted in a culture of trust as well, just
Mm-hmm.
really needing to be able to trust one another, to get the job done, to get it done well, to pay attention to
Yeah,
detail.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
and I think it transcends even the nuke. I mean, just the whole concept on submarines that everyone has to qualify for the Dolphins, and that qualification, whether you're the captain or the lowest, seaman recruit, you're learning the fundamental, things that you need to know to be able to jump in on a moment's notice and with trust be able to deal with whatever casualty comes and to sit your watch station and meet a certain standard. And you can kind of rely on that when someone's pinned on the Dolphins. They've got a certain level of technical competence, demonstrated operational competence, but also trust. Because if you're not trustworthy, no one's going to pin those Dolphins on you. You'll wash out before you get to that point. I mean, that's one of the things that I really love about the goat locker on submarines is they are extremely good at sort of the people development and management and you know bringing them through training and steeping them in the culture and making sure that the bad ones don't get through and the good ones thrive.
how would you generally describe the difference? Suppose we're thinking about you know, a young person who's 18, 19,
Mhm.
attracted to the nuke program, um, and deciding, do I want to go the officer route? Do I want to go the enlisted route? How basically would you describe the the difference between, just in the workstation
Yeah.
that you can bring to your memory?
Yeah.
What are the enlisted folks doing? What is the officer doing? What are the basic differences here?
So, I mean, at its very core, right? It's officers don't touch the equipment. Strictly speaking, we don't get to wrench on it, do anything with it. So that's an obvious kind of thing. Um, and I guess it's the point at which in your career you find yourself, fully into leadership positions that comes earlier for officers. But in some ways it's a different style and type of leadership. And the other key difference is, as enlisted, you specialize, and that's it. I mean, that is your specialty. So if you're an electrician, you're going to be an electrician, and then eventually you're going to work your way up, and you're going to be an electrician chief. Only once you get to the leading, uh, you know, chief for the engineering department or the COB, those are really the only two opportunities where you sort of start to branch out away from your specialty. So you're very much a specialist. So if you're very mechanically inclined and you really like to work on equipment, you don't want to give that up, and you're interested in that over the long haul. You might want to go enlisted and try to be a machinist mate. If you're not all that interested in wrenching on the equipment, you're more interested in things like the tactics of driving a submarine and things like that. But you're intrigued by the nuke stuff too. Then maybe officer's the better route. I think it's yeah, and I saw plenty of enlisted who had college degrees. So unlike other parts of the Navy, that's really not a distinguishing factor. In fact, most of the chiefs I worked with had degrees, so they could have been officers if they'd wanted to.
Yeah.
Um, it was more a choice along those lines of, do you want that close, deep working relationship over more years? Your stints on board tend to be longer as enlisted as well. That camaraderie, I think, ended up being a little bit stronger, my perception among the enlisted ranks. So if you're attracted to that kind of stuff, that might be a reason to go enlisted. And the other might be officer. The other thing is, and I always recommend this. So when I went into subs and when I graduated from the academy, most of my classmates would tell you I was probably a lifer. I was probably going to do it till I retired. But I always held in the back of my mind, I always want to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to have a great career in what I'm doing. And I always want to have a plan B that's equally well developed. Thankfully, I had that and was able to transition out. Maybe we can talk later about why I did. But the point is, you want to select something to do, but also develop yourself to be well-rounded, which is another thing I think nukes are really good at doing. I was always amazed by all the hobbies and other interests, and both academic and athletic and whatever else that people had. But I think you want to aim for more than one thing and be really good at what you're doing and really good at other things too. Have interests, and
Sure.
it gives you options.
Yeah. So the officer enlisted distinction, if I would crystallize what you're saying, officers sort of big picture, looking at the big picture, and of course making the decisions, and that's where the responsibility lies. The enlisted is more literally hands-on, more
Yeah.
detailed, more operating the machinery and so on. The officer's sort of back just observing and making sure everything's running right and giving commands and things like that.
Yeah, and it's the level of expertise. So I, as an officer, might be able to draw a schematic of, I don't know, one of the chillers, and I may be able to talk about the, high level thermodynamic and other chemical processes that are going on in it. But don't ask me to comment on whether or not, that thing is at the right set point and how you would tell and how you would change the set point. And don't ask me all the details about how to properly maintain it and the nuances of, a piece of equipment that's 20 years old. It has its quirks, and every enlisted man who's been out there doing this knows that, it's not just read the textbook and you can operate a piece of equipment. There's a feel, there's a, kind of a continuity of knowledge. So it's that kind of level of specific detail and experience on the equipment that you're operating, both from a maintenance standpoint, which I've talked a lot about, but also the operations. So, I could be the engineering officer of the watch, and yes, I'm giving orders to the electrical operator, reactor operator, and throttleman, but don't ask me the nuances and the finer points of operation of the throttles, right? That's not my thing. But those guys who operated, those stations, they knew precisely how all their switches, gauges, how things would react, how to operate it properly and stuff. So
Right.
it's
Yeah,
similar but different.
sure. And I'm hearing again the theme of trust. The officer
Yeah,
needs to know that these guys know what they're doing,
yeah, that's
which
right.
gets us to the school. And I know there's a lot of secret stuff you can't talk about, but just generally, um, young person's interested in going into the nuke program, or thinks he or she might be interested in going to the nuke program. What are
Mhm.
the topics that nukes really do need to be pretty good at, or what are the academic subjects or fields that nukes really
Sure.
do need to be good at to succeed?
Yeah. So, nuke school and the ongoing nuclear program, I would describe it as very heavily memorization based. So anything you can do to work on and improve your ability to memorize, whether that's memorizing the theory and the other subjects, which I'll come to in nuclear power school, to memorizing immediate actions, follow up actions, procedures, which there are volumes of. Uh, and that starts already in your prototype training and continues every day when you're out there on the subs. And so academically, it's a very math based discipline. I mean, you can't avoid knowing math and being good and fast at math. Um, you know, Nuclear physics, water chemistries, mechanical and other electrical theory and stuff are the actual subject matter and topics. I mean, if you think of what is a nuclear reactor at sea and how does it all work, right? You've got a nuclear reactor and it's everything about nuclear physics applies there. You have to learn about how nuclear fuel is caused to react and all the dynamics of the different radiation particles that come out of it and how you deal with those and or harness them and shut it down when you want to and all those kinds of things. But then all the systems that support are fundamentally mechanical, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, heat transfer, and a lot of mathematical equations that go around that. And once you get outside the reactor compartment, you're dealing with high temperature water and steam driving things like turbines that are either providing propulsion or electricity. And then you're dealing with a lot of electrical, engineering of how the electrical distribution system works. And then you've got all the hydraulics and high pressure air and things like that that operate all the various other systems. So very much kind of a holistic picture. But what it isn't, and a key distinction is, I worked alongside in power school. We had some civilians who are destined for civilian nuclear power related jobs in companies like GE Bettis and things like that. Those guys are definitely learning a level of detail and information and theory that goes beyond what the nuke officers or enlisted are exposed to. No one's going to ask a nuke officer or a nuke enlisted to go design a new reactor from scratch. That's not the skill set. So we're not really getting into the theoretical side to that aspect. Officers are sort of, once you get up to commanding officer, you do need to have a very good grasp. And these are all secretive details, but of like how can you really press this thing? If you're fighting the ship at sea and you've got mass casualties, what's your actual limits, right? Those are things that the captains get trained on. And so, as you work your way up through the officer ranks, those are the kinds of theoretical, you do need to have an understanding of that. And that's not a level of understanding that necessarily the enlisted folks get, but what they get is, very deep into their particular subject matter and how all of that works. So if you're in high school and you think you might want to do it, math and science courses all day long. Um, Work on your memorization skills and your writing skills. It's important. You need to be able to communicate and everything. But I would say that's a secondary concern as long as you can express yourself at a baseline level.
I'm wondering how you would describe nuke culture, and maybe here's the scenario. I'm thinking about when I was in the Navy and the guys I was with and the job I had, and it's just us. And there were 90 of us, and so let's pick randomly 10 of us, and there we are all together. Um, and if you ask, well, so what's that culture like? I'm not sure in a family-friendly environment you really want to go into many details about, the conversations that are
Yeah.
taking place and so on. And maybe that's the same thing with nukes, I don't know. But the listening to, what you're saying though about math and science, another image I might have is, oh, and these guys are hanging around, they're just like doing calculus problems and
No,
stuff like that. So
I wrote
um,
down a word because
yeah,
of how I might think about the culture. One of the elements of it, I came up with rugged nerdiness, which I think is kind of where you're going to.
yeah,
It's this awkward balance between you've got folks who are relatively young, relatively brainy. They've been through a very academically focused process, and their ongoing, uh, day job involves stuff that's pretty technical, and yet you don't want to be too nerdy, but you embrace the nerdiness, and but you kind of, human nature, you want to be cool and accepted, and within the crew. So I always felt there was that tension between, you wanted to be brainy and nerdy but not too brainy or nerdy, and you wanted to be cool but not too cool. And so when you'd put the nukes together with the coners, which is everybody that's not a nuke on a submarine, there's always this healthy tension of, you guys are the nerds and the geeks, and yeah, you guys like to take too many showers. That there's always those dynamics back and forth. But I would describe the culture as very tight, very, it is a bit clicky, if you will. There's this process, and it applies to officers and enlisted. It gets uncomfortable at times, but I don't think this is unique to subs. I think the rest of the Navy and the other military branches also do this, and any kind of high performing units go through this. There's this process of onboarding a new person and getting them into the culture, and it's challenging, right? I mean, if you're a very meek, shy, sensitive person, it's a challenge, right? Because think of it this way: what most sub guys that I served with would say is, you're basically taking the new guy and you're just trying to push as many buttons as you can until you find the one that really gets them excited.
mm,
And once you get through that process, then it's fine. Then everybody's, then you bond, and you're tight. But part of it is the reality of, it's that trust factor, and how do you know how someone's going to perform under whatever scenarios and distress, and can I really rely on this person? Some of it is humans, albeit in a weird way, seeking to find that common trust and bonding. So when you come in off deployment, you get a whole bunch of new crew members. The next time you go out, there's some of that goes on. By the time we got to, Parchi would do one mission a year, one main mission. It's now the Jimmy Carter that does those kinds of things. But by the time you got out on a mission, you were pretty well firing on all cylinders, and then it was it was supportive. I mean, of course, there were fun and games, and people would poke fun, but you knew that everybody had your back for real. And I mean, there were challenging times. I mean, I had some fellow JOs, and we would just sit and commiserate. It was, we were just overwhelmed and too much to do, and a lot of pressures on us. And, our culture enabled us to kind of seek out other crew members and get some support for that. So
sure,
I liked it. I mean, that's one of the aspects of submarine
yeah.
uh, life that I miss.
How long were you an officer in the Navy?
So I guess just about 7 years, from commissioning in '96 to when I got out at the end of 2002.
So you have
Mhm.
experience as an officer, as a submarine officer, as a nuke officer, um, but you don't stay in the nuclear world. You go into finance. You've been a chief financial officer.
Yeah.
So what was that? what was that path for you?
Yeah, I mean, it really all started. I mean, kind of one of the common themes of how I've built my career and my life is I tended to always go after what I perceived. If I had choices, I kind of look at which ones are either the most challenging or, like I alluded to earlier, set me up with optionality. So it starts in high school. I had to pick a language. I ended up picking German, did pretty well there. And my German teacher, who was the best teacher we had at the high school, recommended me for a scholarship program funded by Congress to go be an exchange student in Germany.
Hmm.
I competed for that. I got that. I went to Germany. I'm fluent in German. I learned all that. When I came back, between my dad's service in the Navy and my grandfather had served in the Army and great grandfather, et cetera. So we've got a history of military service. And my dad had been on submarines. And I had just competed for a congressional scholarship. It seemed like a no brainer to pursue the Naval Academy. That's
Right.
essentially what took me in that direction. Not to mention, I mean, the quality of the education is great. Um, I picked political science because I didn't know if I were to get out of the Navy what I'd want to do, but I thought it probably ought to be international. I liked that. I wanted, international business law, something like that. So I picked political science because they don't have a business degree at the Naval Academy or pre-law or something like that. And went nuke, like I said, because I wanted to drive submarines. It wasn't necessarily specifically for the nuke stuff, but that was I viewed it as, I still think, probably the most challenging thing you can do, balanced across, academic and others. I mean, obviously something like Navy SEAL and some of those, respect, right? Those are real tough jobs, but um, that was never a pathway I was looking to go down. So then, coming off of sea duty, I did a shore duty assignment. I went to the Boost program up in Newport to be a Boost company officer, and actually got lucky and ended up being able to run the program or the project to turn 14 of the Navy's officer accession programs, legacy programs, into the Seaman to Admiral 21 program, and then led the Naval Science Institute for its first year. So I say lucky because the detailers, once they kind of know you're getting out, they sent me there as a kind of a go nowhere, do nothing job, and here I got really great experience that leading a big project and with a lot of moving pieces and parts.
Let me just jump in. And did you say you played a role in creating that program, the STA program, the Seaman to Admiral program?
Yeah, I actually ran the project,
Wow.
and everything from how we would wind down other programs to development of the curriculum, the military training program, renovation of facilities to prepare for the students, scheduling it, resourcing it, bringing in new staff to support the programs and training them up, and developing instructor ongoing training programs and things like that. So it was really interesting work.
Yeah, that's
And in my free time, which I didn't have too much of, I figured, well, I'm going to get out. I think, well, I've got the time. I'm going to go ahead and get an MBA. I decided by that point, not law, business. Um, but I didn't know I was going to be a finance guy, right? But I looked at what are the areas within an MBA that are probably the most challenging one. It ranges from general management to marketing to, uh, finance. Finance was the one that was, the fewest people went for because you had to take some of the harder classes and more numerically oriented and things like that. And I looked at it and I said, well, that looks challenging. And two, it doesn't matter what I do in business. I think I got to understand the financials. So it doesn't seem like a poor choice. So that's kind of what headed me down the path that I got into. When I left the Navy, I went through a specialty military recruiter, and they show you to a range of opportunities intentionally because they want you to get to know those roles, those companies, talk to the people, go out on site, meet them, and really figure out where you want to go. So being a nuke, being a finance MBA, they put me in front of everywhere from companies as a maintenance leader to an operations leader to technical sales to marketing, kind of analytical to financial and kind of accounting and analysis and things like that. I thought I'd get pretty bored being just the line manager in an air conditioning plant was one of them, or just the maintenance guy on a pool of equipment for a big, you know, agriculture company. That was another one. Or just doing sales for a computer company. That was another one. What I liked about the analytical roles was I kind of sit across the whole thing, whatever the business I'm in. I get to look at everything, and my job is to sort of make sense of it all and help other people to understand what's going on. And that really appealed to me. That seemed like something that would be intellectually interesting to me, challenging, and impactful. And that's what led me down the path. And I joined Shell because they had a CFO of their North America business who had come from GE. GE is one of the companies out there that's been well known for recruiting former military people on purpose into sort of, you know, they'll take a army tank driver and you're now a marketing person, or, you know, you're a submariner, now you're a finance person. And they've had great success with doing that. So he came and imported that program to Shell. And I got to be the actual first person hired under that program, which led to a lot of great opportunities. And I, you know, got to climb the learning curve very quickly by being exposed to, uh, you know, quite a bit of breadth at Shell. And
Sure.
that's eventually what led me down the. I've been kind of a finance guy ever since. I've jogged left and right a little bit, done some consulting work, but generally speaking, all around the financial side of business.
And so when you look back, just over the past, you finished your Navy service in 2002, is that right?
Yeah.
So we're well over 20 years since you've been out of the Navy. So as you look over these past 20 years, do you see that naval service generally and that nuke service, that service as a nuke, do you see that particularly as laying a really great foundation for what you've done over the past 20 years?
Yeah. I mean, it is one of those things where between going to the Naval Academy, being a successful nuclear submarine officer, and getting an MBA in finance, those three things fundamentally have enabled every single opportunity that I've had. Obviously, some, you know, achievements and performance since then, but yeah, it's and the nuke stuff in particular is something that it's not necessarily outward. You know, it's not worn on my sleeve. Like, yeah, I don't run around with the ball cap on, by the way. That's for your listeners' benefit today. But you know, it's something that inside, you know, there are lessons. Like one particular lesson that I'll jog right here a little bit. But I had a chief in my first division officer role, Chief Buchanan, electrical division. He was the electric division chief. And we had a very difficult equipment failure days before a major deployment, and it sucked. All hands on deck, and it was really difficult work. And everybody kind of got cut short in saying goodbye to their families and stuff. I mean, we were about to be underway for months, and nobody wanted to be there. It was hard work. We were having to figure stuff out. It was very challenging. Well, anyway, me included, right? I was feeling sad about the whole thing too. But I'm there and I'm watching, and we had not our leading petty officer, but our kind of second in charge E6 was, they were working in shifts and he was on shift at the moment. And they were having to thread this massive electrical cabling in and around various pipes and pieces of equipment to try to, you know, replace this cabling that had, you know, essentially blown apart. And think of it as, you know, you're trying to go around something. I can either lay it here and bend it, or I can pre-shape it over here and rotate it around. Think of it, it's sort of like that, but way more complicated. But they've got chain falls and all kinds of equipment up there trying to figure this out. And I noticed that he's trying to go after the bend it in place thing, which is really hard. And he's really got equipment in awkward spots. But I'm there, I'm watching the safety. They're taking the proper precautions. Everything's okay. And I'm there really to look at safety and then to report back to the captain and the XO and make sure that the project is moving forward. And I watched this for a few minutes and I was getting very tempted to jump in and, hey guys, why don't you bend it over here and snake it around? You're going to save yourself a bunch of time. I didn't know, but Chief was actually behind me in the compartment. I didn't know he was even in the compartment at the moment. And I start to lean in to walk forward to, and I got a hand on my shoulder. And he says, "Sir, can I talk to you for a moment?" He's like, "Look, you were about to go in and tell him to snake it around this way and not to bend it that way, weren't you?" I was like, "Yes." I mean, it is kind of obvious, right? He's like, "It is. But, sir, that's your second E6. He's an important person in our division, and we're going to need to rely on him in ways where we need the rest of the division to have faith in him and to be able to follow him and with respect. And if you jump in there and you tell him, because probably a few of the others have figured it out, but he's in charge and he's making it work and he's taking care of his guys and he's making sure it's safe and it'll get done. Maybe not quite as fast as you and I might see that it could be done, but it's going to get done. It'll get done well and it'll get done safely. If you jump in there and right now take away his ownership by telling him to do it a different way, you have undermined him, and we're going to pay the price for that for years. So you need to understand when accountability and responsibility are not one and the same. And you're accountable for whether it gets done safe, sir. You're accountable for whether it gets done. You are not responsible for getting it done. Don't lose sight of that. That's a lesson that, I mean, priceless. I mean, absolutely priceless. And I've remembered that ever since. Every time because now as a CFO, everything that my teams are doing, I can probably take a viewpoint that I could do it better, right? That's not my job, and I can't afford to do everything. I need to be able to rely on people. So it's more about how do I coach and mentor and deliver. So that's one critical lesson that,
Sure. Yeah.
has shaped me.
I wonder if you could talk for a second, bring to your mind, some 20-year-old nuke, and maybe he's out at sea right now. Maybe he or she are out at sea. They've had a really, really stressful day. Feeling discouraged, and they've got 3.5 years to go in their enlistment, sort of thing.
Sure.
You know, what would you say to these young nukes who, at this particular moment, are feeling very stressed out and maybe discouraged?
Yeah. Well, I can say the obvious: what doesn't kill you will only make you stronger, and that is true, by the way. I would also point back to what I said about always be working on what can you do to make your current performance, role, et cetera, better, and what is your alternative. And the only regrets I really have from my time in the military are typically the things that I didn't do that I could have, or the times when I let that stress or angst keep me from doing something. With a little bit of time passage, and I mean only a little bit of time passage, all of the negativity and how you felt and how stressful it was fades away. But what you actually did, what you achieved, what you accomplished, what you learned, that stays with you for the rest of your life. So I had the opportunity to go to a couple of other schools, like jump school, scuba school were two examples. And I passed on those opportunities because I was feeling a little stressed out at the Naval Academy and felt like going home for an extra few weeks instead of doing those schools. Regret that to this day. I think that would have been an awesome experience. There were times when maybe I didn't challenge myself quite as much as I needed to, especially early in my time on the sub, because I was wrestling with that. I'm a young guy and I'm, newly married and, all this. And I was feeling stressed out, and I got out of there and, passed on some opportunities to maybe, learn something new and stuff like that. Those are the times that you regret. And just keep in mind, right? You're part of a crew. They do have your back, right? It's always, you're going to have stress. You're going to have those kinds of moments, but, compartmentalize and work the problem. That's another gift of my submarine service that to me, and over time, I mean, I have another story I tell about that. I won't tell the whole story. We don't have time, but the punchline is there's no such thing as a finance and accounting emergency. Basically, I describe what it was like to be engineering officer of the watch when we had a fire on board, and what what I mean, you want to talk about some stress and challenge. And we had other operational considerations going on that made it like as if a fire isn't bad enough. There were other very, very important repercussions if we didn't do things right. And I had to make some judgment calls on the fly, and it was very stressful. But all that fades away. It's so if you're struggling, learn and train yourself to compartmentalize. Work what is in front of you that you have some degree of control over. Don't worry too much about the rest. Rely on those around you. Find that support network. I mean, I'll show my sensitive side here. I mean, there were a couple of moments I alluded to those other JOs. I mean, I think some tears were shed in those rooms as we were talking to each other. I mean, it was that stressful. And but find and seek out those shipmates who can help you, because nobody's above feeling stressed and strained and stuff like that. So you've got crew there to help you, and just focus on what you can actually change. I mean, I had some times as ship's drill coordinator, I mean, I literally had to say no to the commanding officer on the spot under duress. And, you want to talk about stress, but I compartmentalized. I mean, I had 3 radios on and all hell breaking loose and people taking actions, and I'm trying to make sure everything's going according to script, and it wasn't necessarily. And then the captain decides he wants to go off on a tangent and do things we didn't brief. It was like time slowed down. I had to just say, okay, what do I know has a very low probability of going off the rails? What are the critical few things, and by breaking it down mentally, who cares about feeding theoretical bearings to other submarines? That's not important right now. I've got guys who are stationed, and there's potential operations on sub-safe equipment that has to do with the ballast tank vent operations. That is a absolutely critical thing. Protect that at all costs. I had an experienced officer of the deck. The control of the ship was fine. Who cares if they go too far to the right or the left? It doesn't really matter in the big picture. Maybe we screw up the drill, but we don't sink. And by using that kind of thought process, and then rapidly shedding everything else and focusing on and recalling my memory, piping diagrams, and I had to, on the fly, think of which valves might get manipulated and why, and the order the captain had given me would have caused us to operate something where essentially the backup system had been isolated, and we would have, potentially had a catastrophic problem. And I had to refuse the order I secured from the drill, all without his authorization. He was pissed. He sent me to the wardroom. We had the admiral was on board and all that stuff. And but that's how I got through it, was that focus on what can I control, let go of the rest, prioritize. So when you're feeling stressed, practice that, and that'll help you.
The moment will pass. The memory of doing the best you could in that moment will endure.
Yeah.
And what you learn in the process.
Yeah. My advice, whether you're not yet in the military, should I go? Should I not go? Look, I think the military is a great option. It's not the option for everyone. So, I think maybe think about some of the things I said, and it's okay though. It's okay whether you decide to go or you don't. But if you're considering it, I think it's a great option. It'll change you in good ways. And then I can't stress enough, when you're in, keep a diverse range of options open to you, both within the military, and be prepared to capitalize on opportunities within the military, or if you ever decide to get out, be well prepared to do that, and then carry that through the rest of your life. Don't ever, I found too many people, and don't be afraid to call it. So this is the thing. I didn't say why I got out of the Navy, because I was doing well. I was rated top JO for every year, got all the right medals and ribbons and all that stuff. I had the highest operational reactor safeguard exam. I had all the right jobs, the QAO, the drill coordinator. I even acted as the navigator briefly when the nav got hurt. I mean, I had a good career going, but I didn't have a technical degree. Nobody ever told me that my political science degree was going to make sure that my technical rating was kept low. So I wasn't going to be able to get the engineer job as my department head tour. And because I wouldn't get the engineer job, you've got a fairly limited percent probability of becoming a commanding officer. And I kind of viewed it as, well, that's the career path that represents me being my best. And if I can't do that, despite a lot of positives that I have about being in the Navy and doing what I'm doing, I don't want to set myself up for 10 years down the road a massive disappointment and find myself wondering whether I could have done something better or more impactful. I've seen people who are still in, who are classmates, who have absolutely gone and got multiple advanced degrees and formed networks. I mean, they could step out of the military in a heartbeat and be wildly successful, but they're choosing to keep going in the Navy, and that's great too. So it's not a binary decision. It's a development of a range of options. And I myself, like, I've been able to absorb various job changes and things like that, and in and out of different industries, and whether I'm working for myself or for another company. And I do that because I keep that range of options available to me on purpose. So do that would be my advice.